Thank you, everyone. I'm Marloes Vredenborg. I'm from Utrecht University, and I will present my paper looking at FAccTs, exploring music industry professionals' perspective on music streaming services and recommendations. Well, most of you will know any online music platforms, such as, for instance, Spotify, which provides you access to around 100 million music tracks. An important component of these music platforms is the recommender system integrated into them. And they offer music to users based on their current goals, for instance, their musical taste or the time of day. Two important components of these recommender systems are collaborative filtering and content-based filtering. And collaborative filtering means that items are recommended to you based on other uses that are similar to you, whereas content-based filtering means that you get items recommended based on what you have been listening to previously, or for instance, items that you liked. Well, these recommended systems really influence what you are listening to as a user, and they are traditionally really designed to satisfy the user. Yet there are also other stakeholders involved. So it's not only about the user. More and more research is looking at the other stakeholders. So for instance, the artist as well as the music platform. But there are way more involved. So it's not only about those three. There are, for instance, the record labels, or for instance, the producers, anything like that. And if we don't understand what their perspective is on these music platform streams, we don't know how they are affected and how we can maybe improve them to really satisfy all the stakeholders. So important in research that addresses these stakeholders' values, fairness, accountability, and transparency are very important. And fairness is really about fair outcomes for either individuals or a group of individuals. But it's very difficult because it's a rather subjective term. You cannot really measure fairness. So it's really open to interpretation what fair is. It's way easier to say when something is unfair, for instance. You have popularity bias, which really increases the gap between already very popular artists and less known artists. This we can say is rather unfair. And diversity is a means to really improve this fairness. Then you have accountability, which is about holding the responsibility for the decisions made either by you or the algorithm. And you have transparency, which is really about getting insights into the inner workings of a system. And this really helps with the trust of the user. So we did an exploratory research to understand the perspective of these music industry professionals, and we had 3 research questions. So we wanted to understand their perspective on the role of music streaming services in their jobs. We wanted to understand their perspective of fairness, diversity, transparency, and control for artists. And we wanted to understand their perspective on variety, transparency, and control for users. So how did we do this? We had a questionnaire that we conducted at the Eurexordening Noorderslag Festival, which is a really big music conference festival in the Netherlands, and it's European-wide known. And we asked participants to consider 3 points of view. So we asked them to think about their own role within the music industry. We asked them to take the point of view of artists, and we asked them to take the point of view of consumers. Then we asked them several questions that were inspired by previous research, and we mostly used a 5-point Likert scale to ask these questions. But they were also able to answer that they did not prefer to answer or that they did not know what to answer. And we did descriptive statistics to report on the averages on participants' agreements, but we also did man-Whitney U-tests to compare between independent groups. As you can see from this table, we had quite a good balance in gender, age, nationalities, and roles. Yet it was an exploratory study, so it could have been balanced a bit more, but for this purpose, we are already very happy with how it looks like. Wow. So it won't be possible for me to discuss all the results. If you want to know more, feel free to read the paper. But first of all, the point of view, participants' own role within the music industry. What we saw was that 77% of the participants use streaming services regularly for their work. But what we saw in terms of transparency is that they were slightly uncertain about how a recommended system actually work. And they also felt as if the streaming services did not inform them enough to make strategic decisions. Looking at the independent groups, we looked at music providers, which is any type of music providing. It's not only artists, it's about also record labels, for instance. We grouped them and we compared them to the other participants, and we saw that they found it more important to have contact with streaming services representatives, which makes sense. Then the second point of view, we asked them to place themselves in the shoe of the artist. And in terms of transparency, we also saw that this was slightly unclear for which reasons, when, and to whom an artist's music is recommended. And there was a general agreement that this should be made more clear. In terms of control, we saw that they were generally neutral about control of recommendations of their music. And we especially saw that the context in which they were generally neutral about the control about that, but the control to whom their music is recommended, they were less positive. Then contacting with streaming service as an artist, they mentioned that it was slightly difficult to reach out, and they particularly mentioned that if you're big, you have a listening ear. So if you're already kind of well known, it's easier to get in contact with the streaming services. But if you're new on the market, for instance, then it's way more difficult. Then in terms of fairness, we saw that they were not quite sure what then would be good means to improve fairness. Some suggested quotas and others did not consider this viable. This was also in agreement with some previous artist interviews. And they thought that it should really be about equality, so not only using quotas. In terms of responsibility, we did see that the participants thought that streaming services were responsible for improving diversity and inclusion. And we saw that music providers rated this significantly lower compared to the other participants. Then we looked at the differences between age group, and we can see here that for participants who identified themselves as men, significantly disagreed more with recommending music from non-mainstream artists, underrepresented genders, and underrepresented nationalities compared to people that identified themselves as female. Also for the others, it was lower, but this was not significant. Then the third point of view, the last one, we asked them to put themselves in the shoes of consumers. And in terms of variety, we saw that they think that streaming services should play a significant role in diversifying consumers' listening behavior, and mainly by really diversifying the recommendations that they get. In terms of transparency, we saw that it was also, from that point of view, slightly unclear why specific music is recommended to the user, and that this should be made more clear. In terms of control, that we're neutral about the user's control over their recommendations, but music providers were significantly less satisfied with the user's control about their personalized playlists compared to non-music providers. So what can we learn from this? First of all, music industry professionals desire that there is more insight into how a recommender system works for both the artist as well as the users. They suggest increasing control for artists as well as for the users. They feel that streaming services have impact diversity and inclusion, and that they have the responsibility to counter this imbalance. And they think that using fairness enhancing interventions is, they support that by in various degrees, but it's really differing per application area. Thank you very much. If you want to see the data, it is online available, so you can see all the answers to the questions.
What? That was a question.
Yes.
Any questions? Yeah.
Thank you. I think you touch into a very interesting problem. Not so much, not only for music industry, but also we are surrounded by recommendation systems. Netflix recommends images and films, and even we interact with bots, and we don't know where they get their data. So all these aspects like fairness, transparency, etc., are big issues. Now, I'm curious to know whether you looked into, because there's a big research topic to, for instance, fairness I mean, how fair they are. Do they get money by musicians or companies that to promote higher in their recommendations certain songs against others? I mean, do we know anything about it? Are they clear, transparent about the policies and the algorithms? Do we know? And that concerns your audience from what I see here. Now, second, the algorithms they use, sometimes inherently they are not transparent. I mean, you cannot chase back why this is recommended against something else. We have a vague idea, but not clearly, and you cannot trace it back.
No.
And that's why, for instance, with ChatGPT, you cannot ask it, how do you know this?
No.
Doesn't know. It's not there. So it's inherent in the algorithm, the neural nets they use. So, and the third question is, people who you asked, which the sample for this huge event, it was a bit small, 35.
Yes.
I think perhaps you need to ask more. Did you ask them about their own experience with streaming? I mean, did they like what the recommendations? Because that may reflect also their stand against your question.
Yes. Yeah, it was a rather indeed small sample. It was a really big music festival, but it was quite difficult to actually get them because the questionnaire was in total, I think, 30 minutes. It was a rather big questionnaire, so there are way more responses to this. We also asked them about their perspective on, in general. I didn't report that for now, but they were really a variety of answers, so not everyone was as happy as the others. So yeah, that could have indeed effect on the rest of it. And in terms of transparency, I think, yeah, it is very difficult to be transparent on certain stuff. It's not always easy to see what the algorithm is doing, but there's also a big part where we are able to see some things and that we are still not showing. So there are some decisions made by the algorithm, or there are some reasons why you're getting certain recommendations, and it's still not clear, especially for artists, for instance, why their music is or is not recommended. So I think that for users, it's becoming more and more better, but for artists or for instance, the record labels, it's still really difficult to see for them, like, okay, why is my music recommended or why is my music not recommended? And there are some situations where this would be possible. So yeah, it is indeed very difficult, but there's also like saying that you don't know also helps. So I'm really in favor of that. Also, sometimes letting know that you don't know why something made a certain decision is already acknowledging that there is something. That really helps also with trust. Quickly.
Yes, very quick. I think what you're talking about is AI explainability.
Yes.
So there's a
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.